Hi, and welcome to Power of 10, a podcast about design operating at many levels, zooming out from thoughtful detail through to organisational transformation and onto changes in society and the world. My name is Andy Polaine. I'm a service design and innovation consultant, design leadership coach, educator and writer. My guest today is Natalie Dunbar, a UX-focused content strategist with a unique blend of skills as a journalist, content writer and user experience researcher. She excels in balancing the creation of delightful user experiences with strategic content that supports the needs of a business or organisation. She's worked in various roles as a content writer and strategist for major brands and produced original content for many federal agencies. Natalie is also an active member of Women Talk Design and was a founding member of the Content Strategy Los Angeles Meetup Group. She's author of the newly released Rosenfeld Media book, From Solo to Scaled, Building a Sustainable Content Strategy Practice. Natalie, welcome to Power of 10.
Thank you for having me, Andy. I'm so glad to be here.
So congratulations on getting the book done. I know we had a kind of a brief exchange sort of close to the end of it.
Yes.
And talked about the sweeping up. I always call it the sweeping up of the sort of last bits of getting a book done take a remarkable amount of time.
Oh my goodness, yes.
So it's well done on getting it out. So how has the reception been of that? We'll get on to the content of it so far, but how has it been landing so far?
I have been absolutely floored by the reception. As we're speaking, the book is still only available from Rosenfeld.
Yeah.
And in about 10 days, it will be widely available from, other booksellers like Amazon and others.
Yeah.
However, it is sitting, at least a week or so ago, it was at number 1 on Amazon for the most wished for new releases in content management.
Nice. Well done.
I don't even know how to receive that other than to have a lot of gratitude. It's been amazing.
That's great. So before we get onto the book, I always think it's useful for people, they hear from people who are well established in their careers and when people write a book as well, there's a little bit of that, I'd like to do that one day, or I'm looking up to that person. I think it's always useful, particularly for more junior people, to hear what your journey was to here, because it's usually not a straight line.
Definitely not. I think I knew when I was very young that I wanted to be a writer of some kind. And then I went and did everything but writing as a career. Stumbled into it as a marketing communications specialist decades ago, actually. And what I really wanted to do was be a journalist. So I went from marketing communications into journalism, worked for a local award-winning weekly here where I am in Pasadena called the Pasadena Weekly, and then ended up being an editor at another small town paper. I was kind of doing both at the same time, actually, and really got into reporting and writing in that kind of genre. And then I think it was SEO that first grabbed my attention as things were moving from the printed space to digital. I taught myself how to hand code. Those skills are very much obsolete now, but I knew that they would come in handy. I always make people laugh when I tell them I still can make letters blink on a page. That's about the extent of my coding these days. But I think I had an inkling that online was the space that I wanted to be in. I was very curious about technology. So then I moved into the digital space and started to hear this phrase, consumer experience, user experience. And I'm like, what's that? And I started working with, what were they called then? Human factors engineers and UX designers and so on and so forth. And when I kind of veered off into product management as a user researcher, and then I made my way back to content, and content strategy became a thing, and I was like, oh, that's what I do. And here we are.
So it sounds to me, and you talk about this a little bit in the book, you were doing content strategy or content. I'm going to come back to actually the differences between them, kind of before it had the name. Is that fair to say? Or did you already have in your head, like, this is content strategy, this is content design?
I definitely did not have content design in my brain at that time. I had been exposed to, and I think this might be the part in the book you're talking about, there was a group of content strategists who came in from an agency to help work on a project at the online directory where I used to work. And I didn't know what a content strategist was. And they didn't really tell us what it was that they did. It was like a secret society that was existing. They didn't really share a lot of artifacts. They were just doing their thing in the background and then would tell us, you need to do this, you need to do that. But I was curious about it more than just like having someone tell me, like, I guess if there was an equivalent, I was the UX writer to them.
Right.
So they were doing strategy work, and then we were supposed to execute by writing whatever it was that they felt like we should write. But I think I first encountered Christina Halverson's book during that time, but I don't think I read it immediately because I was just like, oh, I don't know what that means, content strategy. Am I really equipped to do that? Then I went off and did the product and the user research and came all the way back around. And then the discipline was maturing. I left my position as a user researcher, not voluntarily. The company was bought, positions were eliminated,
yeah.
and then I had to rebrand myself. And I kept seeing content strategy and all the job listings, and I'm like, okay, let me look at this really closely now. And I picked up like a temporary assignment, and the hiring manager handed me Christina's book and Richard Sheffield's book and literally said, okay, what I need you to do is this. Read these books and then do this with this site that we're building. And I'm like, okay. And I literally was like learning as I was like, how does the saying go? You're like building the plane while you're flying it or something like that. Yeah, that was my introduction. It was definitely a fast and furious, but I fell in love with the work.
Yeah, it's great. So Christina wrote the foreword to your book as well. So a nice kind of full circle.
Yes, she did.
Yeah. So I'm a huge secret kind of admirer of, well, not that secret. I'm a huge admirer of content people in general. I always have said I think every design team should have a content person on it in a way that you probably wouldn't have a design team without someone who is a visual designer, whether it's, graphic or UI designer. And yet I would always see like a smattering of them wherever I went, or as you've talked about from solo person. But I'm really interested to get onto the scaled bit, because I don't know if I've ever worked in an organization or worked for a client even, where it's been sort of properly scaled. I think I've always encountered, the one or two, or if I'm lucky, three people who are kind of working away, kind of in content with a lot of, nobody really understands what I do here, but it's so important, which it is. So we'll get on to that. I want to come back to, because people may not know, or I don't know if it's a sort of perennial kind of argument and conversation, what's the difference between content strategy, content design, and or UX writing?
Oh my goodness. It depends on who you ask.
Or what's your, because you talk about, you do have a sort of table of it in the book. So what is your kind of definition of it? What's the difference?
I have to lean on I think I have the diagram about the front end and back end content strategist, but
yes,
over the years, I think that's really kind of been, and that Venn diagram. Anne Hadley wrote an article for contentmarketing.com I think that's the website. I can't remember right now. And it was a really good conversation about, the front end work that focuses on, the user and works with research and visual design. And then kind of that middle space where there's like taxonomy and nomenclature and labeling and wayfinding, and then the back end where you're working more with like URL redirects and working with content modeling and content modeling documentation. I definitely live on the left side of that space more. I'm a purist when it comes to content strategy. I struggle with the difference between content strategy and content design, because so many organizations have started with the name content strategy and then have rebranded whatever that team looks like to content design. I think it's partially because there's this niche of product content strategy where you're
Right.
working in lockstep with designers. And as our co-author friends have written, writing is designing. So
Yeah.
we're designing the interface with words instead of, visual elements, although we do get involved with that. So I still think that there's, I think the relationship between content strategy and content design, and I may get in trouble with some folks for saying this, but I think that's still a little bit closer. If I
Mm.
were to isolate UX writing, I really feel like that's the interface writing, the UI UX writing that makes an experience usable, also
Yeah.
makes it come alive. It's, to me, within the product or feature experience that you're building, whereas content strategy and content design, and really more content strategy, looks across the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And in many cases, content strategists do not write at all. They don't create any copy. There's a
Yeah.
UX writing team that they may hand off to, and then they
Yeah.
execute on the strategy.
UI writing would kind of make almost more sense of the way you've just described it, as
Yeah,
it really is the kind of tangible thing that someone interacts with or sees or reads
exactly.
versus the kind of, okay, the structural stuff.
And it's very important work, because
Yeah.
that's not to say that it's not also strategic, but I think it's strategic it's in the weeds strategic, whereas content strategy is kind of more, the 30,000 foot view across all the things. I
Mm.
could say, maybe, yeah.
So as the theme of this show, and basically the thing I always just bang on about, is this idea of kind of zooming in and out, different sort of levels of zoom.
Hmm.
One of the things, as you're just talking about this in the book, I was very pleased to see you talked about service design and service blueprints, and that whole kind of front end and back end thing that we were just talking about
Hmm.
obviously maps to that. And part of the job is to map out all of those different front end and back end aspects that are going on. In what you were saying, I often talk about how those two zoom levels interact with each other. So you might have a strategic shift, or you might have a strategy, and then the question is, how does that get expressed across all the touch points? And so how does that get expressed in the words that people are reading, and vice versa? Right? How are those words in touch points that may not have been thought of in terms of connecting to the strategy? How are they either deliberately or accidentally, saying something about the bigger picture? So, I've got a really banal example, actually, which is I have a robot vacuum cleaner, and it sends me notifications. But the notifications are written in this style like a project manager who is kind of irritated with me. So, water tank needs emptying ASAP. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I better go. And I feel like I've become a slave to this robot. Right? And then I keep saying, God, they really need a decent content writer here, because it feels like someone has not really thought about what it's like to be dinged with these notifications. But, it's a classic example of, the personality of a product
Absolutely.
or service then being expressed through those tiny things. I actually hate kind of Apple's fitness stuff of like, great job and all that kind of, I hate that kind of motivational speech that, the watch tells me when I happen to have walked a long way or something. You've done
Exactly.
it. You've stood up, 10 times today. Like, oh, okay. So, that sort of backwards and forwards,
Yes,
I've always felt that there's quite a lot of relationship between the sort of thinking in service design and also content strategy and content design.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think mapping touch points is, I'm still a novice. Thanks to your book and a few others, I've been able to at least speak to it, I hope, in a way that was accurate. I think I've had actually an opportunity in my last couple of roles to talk about and then introduce doing a blueprint, service blueprint,
Yeah.
where we could think about touch points along whatever journey we were mapping out, and think about what's appropriate to say and when, and what format is most appropriate to say it in. So another way to say that content strategists will definitely relate to, hat tip to Christina, getting the right content to the right people at the right time and
Nice.
in the
Yeah.
right format. and on the right device, right? So, because our book was content strategy for the web, and
Yeah.
we've got all these other things that we work with now.
Yeah.
But I think about this example that you brought up about your robot that vacuums, and I would be irritated beyond belief if I was the whole reason why you would get something like, well, the whole reason why I would get something like that is I have two dogs and I just don't want to deal with.
That's why I got one.
Exactly, right? So it's a chore,
Mm.
and understandably, chores are not fun. So there's an opportunity right there. Instead of preaching about what needs to be refilled or whatever, give the thing some personality. It's
Yeah.
funny because family friend has a tortoise named Roomba, and immediately I'm just like, the exact opposite of what that little thing goes around and does. But right there is like an opportunity. It's to be playful and to make something that really should be a delightful experience. You've got a robot vacuuming your floor. Like there's an opportunity there to not spice it up, but like make it fun,
Yeah, and it feels like there's been that notifications are equated with alert messages, right?
Right.
Because I think even alert messages don't have to be like that, but there's
Yeah.
that. I'm going to be a bit mean to engineers, but I think from a sort of engineering perspective, in the program, it's basically the kind of same thing, which is kind of tell the user a thing. But a notification feels different because it kind of feels like a personal message in a way that
Right.
an alert box doesn't, right? And that's the sort of contextual paradigm. And a friend of mine, Simon Waterfall, once said this thing, which I thought was really good. He said, I could send you a text message about something, inviting you to a party, and that you would take it and read it and whatever. He said, if I wrote the same message on in hand calligraphy and a uniformed messenger came in with that on a silver platter, the content stays the same, but the context of which really changes, obviously, the way you react and respond to that message. And I kind of feel like one of the things that content strategists spend a lot of time doing, what you're just talking about across those different devices, is really thinking about the context someone
Yes.
is in at that point,
Yes.
rather than it's just a kind of all text is equal.
Yeah, that is definitely spot on. There are definitely situations where you want to think about whether your messaging should be more straightforward. Say if you're a retailer and you've gotten an order wrong or something like that, and the person, you know, tries to set up, return or something like that, that's not necessarily the time to be celebratory or,
Selling them something,
yeah,
upselling.
yeah, exactly. Hey, messed this up. Let's, why don't you buy this other thing? It's like, no, let's take care of the situation at hand and leave that person feeling like, even if they got a push notification or an email, that they were heard without stumbling over, too many apologies and that kind of things. There's just such a delicate balance. I think that's where UX writing really shines, because you're thinking about like the moment that message is received, and really considering the mental state and the mental model that person might be in. Not saying that content strategy doesn't do that, because again, we're looking across, and we're looking at content strategy is looking at where might we, reach out to a person, who's going in this path and this thing happens. So what is this use case? And what is the most effective way and the most appropriate way to reach out to this person? What touch points should we use? And then the UX writer can come in and say, this should be celebratory. This should be an acknowledgement. This should be confirmational, not confrontational,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. Both disciplines, all of our content disciplines consider voice and tone.
Yeah.
I think more so at the UI, UX writing level, and even the content design piece of all of those disciplines. And then for content strategy, the way I like to explain it is when I'm faced with digital experience where there might be more than one persona that I need to talk to, let's say, how does my tone need to shift for each audience member?
Yeah.
I may not write the words exactly, but I'll decide or recommend this tone with this touch point for that use case and that tone for that touch point, and then leave it to the UI UX writer to express that in words.
I have seen those huge spreadsheets.
Yeah. And sometimes I have to do both. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, I recommend this. And then I go and I write it. Yeah.
So, content, given that it's really at the pointy end of user or customer experience, right? It is a very direct thing that people experience. I think, I have a bit of a theory, a bit like talking about my vacuum cleaner, that, as humans, we're kind of deeply narcissistic race, and that we kind of anthropomorphize everything, including companies. And so content, because it's words, and because we're used to speaking words with other human beings, content feels, I think that's why we kind of feel it's a very sort of personal thing, and why, this company's talking to me in this way that seems really inappropriate and all that stuff. In German, I live in Germany, and there's a formal and informal version of German, and some companies switch to the informal because they want to be more sort of youthful and trendy, and sometimes it seems appropriate and sometimes not. But given all of that, it feels like content sometimes just happens in organizations. Has that been your experience? I mean, is that basically the fact that that's going on? Is that what means you have a job?
Yes. Ask my family members who all come to me. I don't know what this means. What are they trying to get me to do on this website? You're always going to have a job.
Why do you think it is that content is? Because, I'm going to get on to, because you actually talk a lot about the kind of the business bit of content strategy and stuff, which I want to get onto next. But why do you think it is that whilst it's very much the first thing often that customers or users experience, it often seems to be the last thing that businesses or organizations get a handle on?
Oh, that's so well said. It's a mystery to me because I can't think of a product or service or experience or white paper or website or anything that's going to make a difference for a brand without words and giving some thought to the appropriateness of, I don't know, tooting your own horn in a white paper or, a positioning kind of document in the marketplace versus, some kind of use case of a user encountering your brand digitally and how you would speak to them. I can't believe that this conversation is still so relevant in 2022.
Yeah, no, it's awful,
and like I hear on all different meetup calls and different webinars, and I'm either attending or speaking at. There's so many jobs out there and for content design and content strategy, and I'm like, how is that possible? Like, I understand that it is possible, but don't brands get it by now that it's central to everything that they do? How even if you decide not to come across more conversational and informal, it's the words that you use to describe what it is that you do that are going to make people either decide to do business with you or not. How is that not important?
Maybe it's the universality of it. It's like, we all do words. So,
I think
it just is kind of an invisible thing.
Yeah, and I giggle with my design partners all the time when, we're doing design workshops and, design sprints and things like that. And they're like, okay, we want you to sketch out. And I'm like, have you seen my stick figures? They're awful. So, and I definitely am not a visual designer. That said, I have a good sense, or I've developed a good sense of what works visually in terms of how all the pieces come together. So content to me is not just words. Content to me, and I think to most of us in this space, it's about the visual elements. Can you tell a story here with an infographic, or can you tell a story with a video? What's most appropriate in this space? I'm surely not going to tell a designer how to design a visual element, but there could be one visual element that'll be more impactful than another. That's
Yeah.
content.
Yeah.
That's content.
And so, but in your book, you talk about a lot. You say, if you want to learn how to do content strategy or content design, here's a great list of books, and they are a great list of books. But there's also much more here about the process and frameworks and kind of governance that's going on in how content sort of makes its way through the process and who does what and ways to kind of go about that governance as you scale. So the book is called From Solo to Scaled. You have this building metaphor. Tell me, I love metaphors. My favorite one's gardens, actually, for sort of ecosystems.
Oh, wow.
But tell me about your building metaphor, because it's, and compression and tension.
Oh my goodness, yes. So long time ago, in another career, I worked in building and project management, and I was trying to understand like what the construction manager would be talking about when he was talking about tenant improvements, because I worked in a high rise in downtown LA, and we had all these commercial tenants, and I was like the admin to this particular construction manager. And I stumbled on a book, Why Buildings Stand Up, and I was like, well, that's interesting. I'd love to know why they stand up. I'd also like to know why they fall down, but maybe not be in them when that's happening, especially in earthquake country where I live. But there was something about that book that just stayed with me over the years. I got the book, I read it, and it made construction make sense. It feels like, as I've gone back to look, because I've referred to it in my book, it's more about a story about construction, like how construction works.
Right.
It does break down different terms like tension and compression, but it's a layperson's book, I think, and it's so beautifully written, and it just stayed with me. And there is a follow-up, Why Buildings Fall Down. But in terms of the building metaphor in the book and content strategy, I talk about how I would often hear leaders in the UX space talk about standing up a practice. And there would be all this effort into like, let's stand up a content strategy practice or this or that, UX design, whatever it is. But particularly with content strategy, I would see these grand methods of standing up a practice only to have it fall down later on. And falling down could be, there's budget cuts or new business priorities. So one of the first things to go is this elaborate practice that's been stood up. Right. Or it gets absorbed into a marketing function, because I'm very decidedly a UX content strategist. And that's no diss, as we would say, to content marketing strategists, but it is a different thing. For listener edification. The work that we do in UX content strategy is usually internal to the brand's digital experiences, whereas content marketing strategy is more about creating content that you're going to put on third-party websites or social media or that kind of thing. So it's more external. It's still content created by the brand, but it's very different usages.
You make the thing and they tell everyone about it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
As far as tension and compression, we're thinking of here, tension and being pulled in different directions that may weaken a structure, whereas hopefully I'm getting this right. It's early in the morning here. I'm like, is that the right? And compression being squeezed, right? And compacted, where it becomes difficult to do the work of content strategy because there's so much pressure coming from usually top-down pressure where doing the work becomes difficult. I'll leave it at that so I don't trip up on my own words.
Can you give me an example of maybe how people can deal with that? Because that's a pretty common refrain, right? Is that we don't have enough time or resources or whatever it is.
Yeah, the tension piece is just being pulled in many different directions and having different expectations from different partners you may work with. So you may have one expectation from more technical partners where there's a need to have, content strategy and, the end product of that, the actual copy done in a certain way that's, I would say fast without a lot of attention to detail so that, the content, so whatever it is that's being built can the level of effort can be estimated. Sometimes that's where you'll find your lorem ipsum and that kind of thing. And then later on, you've got this great experience, you got this beautiful design, and poof, the content just breaks everything. Because maybe they didn't consider that it's not just, this block of text, a headline, and some buttons, but it also requires a paragraph of disclaimer text. And it's like,
or you write it in German.
Yeah.
And then
We don't have room for that disclaimer. What do you mean you don't have room? It's like, it's a regulatory thing. We have to have this there. So there's that tension of just being pulled maybe in one direction by, maybe your engineering partners, where your marketing partners may be, if you have any dependencies on them, you might be waiting for, what the product marketing is going to sound or look like. So then you can take some of that language and, incorporate that into the UX so the experience is seamless. I'm a big fan of the marketing funnel. I have no idea where that happened or why, but when I think about a marketing funnel, the top of the funnel where your people are doing their discovery and they're, just starting to learn about a brand or a service or a product, and in that middle where they're starting to make that decision, you go from the marketing of a thing into the user experience because you're going deeper into that digital experience, right? Mm-hmm. And along the way, you're building that trust. And there's kind of hopefully a seamless handoff where marketing has done the work of bringing the people in, and then we've got to, make sure the experience that they're having, that they convert to whatever it is that you're trying to convert them to, whether it's a customer or a member or whatever. Sometimes that's really kind of, it's not a technical term, but janky. It's just like, it's not.
Yeah, I love the term. So I wrote a whole thing about jank, actually. I love
yes,
that.
it's just not smooth.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, again, where that tension happens. Compression, on the other hand, is a good example of that is the constant education of a leadership that just doesn't understand. It's like, well, we've given you, the green light to go ahead and build this content strategy thing that you're building. When is the content strategy going to be done? Yeah. And the answer is never. Yeah. And then you start to feel that pressure, that compression, like you hired this team. It's like, well, we didn't hire them to, and this is particularly in-house, we didn't hire them to be one and done and then go away. This is a cyclical thing. So we talk about the content life cycle. Somebody's got to be paying attention to why this experience on the site and this copy on the site is from 1998. Why is it still here? Is it still relevant? Really? So yeah, it's those two things are, it's a give and take either way you look at it, whether it's pressure coming from the sides or pressure coming top down.
Yeah. This is why I like the metaphor of gardens, because no one ever says the garden is done, right? We've shipped a garden. It's just this kind of ongoing thing. When you talk about alliances, there's a really good section in the book about alliances and how to kind of build them and stuff. And it's almost like you talk about different departments or disciplines within the organization. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like a phrase book, which I guess makes sense from sort of content person, of, the language that these people use and how to kind of speak to these people about content. And it's, going back to what you were saying, I think there about leadership, there's a lot in there, and that's the bit I can really recommend. I actually don't think it's just for content people. It's kind of a section of the book that I feel like anyone working in an organization that is designing stuff and making stuff could really benefit from. But you also talk, the book is Solo to Scaled. You talk about these sort of moments of growth. Oh. And I'm wondering, when there's a thing that happens when, say, people start an agency or something, and, getting to 5 people is pretty easy, sort of 10 people fairly similar. And there's like an inflection point as you go from 10 to 20. And then there's kind of somewhere around from sort of 20 to 50 where you start to have HR practices and, people and a full-time accountant and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes, people find it really hard to escape velocity to get to the next stage. Are there any kind of like step moments in scaling content strategy practice where there's there's an inflection point here that's really hard to get from this bit to the next?
In my experience, it's usually when the demands for content strategy or content strategists is beyond the size of the team that you have. All of a sudden, everybody wants a piece of this content strategy. And it could look different. So going back to those different partners that you might encounter as a content strategist, whether it be, a visual designer, which is more typically the person that you're going to be partnered, or the discipline you'll be partnered with the most. But there's also the engineers. There's also instructional designers. There's so many ways that we can partner with different disciplines to, look at, if you're working with engineering, for example, which is fascinating to me. I'm in no way an engineer. I told you about my coding skills at the beginning, but I still feel like I can sit in a room or Zoom room with engineers, and I have done this in a recent job that I had, and be not only the only content person in the room, the only creative or UX person in the room, and still be able to hold a conversation. And that's because I listen to what they're saying. I may not understand all of the tools and some of the phraseology that they use, but I get the gist of what they're talking about. The thing that I want to create, the experience that I want to create using content as kind of a lever to, get to the next point of the experience. Maybe it can't be built. So maybe I need to be able to articulate in a different way how we can create an experience that is frictionless. When that starts happening exponentially, and there's, people and disciplines from across the organization that, want this service, and, you've got all the office hours and you've got all these different ways that people can kind of get a little piece of it, that's when it's like, oh, we've reached that inflection point. We need more bodies. We need more people who are going to excel in this content space, whether it's an embedded model where you have a content strategist, per line of business, or however the organization is set up, or you set up like a kind of a content strategy agency within, design ops or whatever.
Yeah.
And, there's an intake and whoever's available works on the thing. When those projects and those people, when those numbers start to grow, that's when it's time to start scaling.
Right.
And that's the only way that you're going to be able to survive. Or the hard work that you did to start the practice in the first place kind of starts to disintegrate, because now you've talked about how great content strategy is and you've built this great reputation, but now you can't give the people what they want because there's not enough for you to go around.
So you're a victim of your own success is
exactly
where you end up. Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned you have Candy Williams, who's the author and head of content design at, or an author and head of content design at Bumble. And there's a bit where he says for her, alignment comes down to showing a keen and genuine interest in other people's roles and what they do. And I underline it because it's just like, we think of alignment sometimes as they just don't get it. I need to kind of make them understand rather than,
yes.
coming from the other direction of, and I would bet it's partly because you're a content person. You're like, how can I rephrase this so that this person, it's my fault that it's not landing with them. How can I rephrase this that it's so that they kind of get it? So listen, we are coming up to time. It felt like that was quite a nice place to end. The show is called Power of 10 after the Eames film, Powers of 10, about the relative size of things in the universe. And I'm always fascinated, we talked a bit about this before, around the kind of relationship between things at that very micro scale and their effect on the macro and vice versa. So the final question is always, what one small thing you think is, overlooked or underrated that could be designed or redesigned to make to have an outsized impact on the world?
Oh, definitely. It's kind of related to what we were just talking about. It's listening, active listening. I am guilty of being in conversation, especially with loved ones, because you think you just anticipate what it is they're going to say or how they're going to react or something, and you're listening to respond rather than listening to understand. Active listening is the thing, just the act of listening, but active listening, like really hearing. So important, because we have so much information coming at us from so many different channels, and it's hard to sometimes discern what is the useful bit from all the other noise. And I think listening actively is a skill that I wrote an article about this, so I'm very passionate about this. The gentleman who coined that phrase wrote a booklet to management. I forget what the company was, but it was like early 1950s U.S., corporate America. And when I found a reprint of their booklet, everything was still written in the pronouns of him. Right. When a manager is doing this, he, blah, blah, blah. But when I stripped that all away and just focused on what they were talking about, just the act of not trying to solve something before you fully understand what the problem is, that's where active listening comes in. So whether it's alignment with a teammate or cross-functional partner, whether it's hearing from your users or customers, whether it's your loved ones at home, just so important to focus on really listening to understand rather than listening to be heard.
I think that would make the world a much better place. Where can people find you online?
I am on Twitter and Instagram. My handle is The Literati.
Very nice.
I am on LinkedIn. I welcome anyone with questions about content strategy who's curious about what this work is to please reach out. I have people who not a formal mentoring, but just, we have a lot of these UX boot camps and different things they're quite ubiquitous and quite popular. And many of those people will come out wondering, like, if they're focused on content, like, well, what is this content strategy? And I love talking with them about, how many different ways that you can get involved with this work. So, yeah, hit me up on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. I'm there.
Okay. Good. Well, I'll put all the links in the show notes. Natalie, thank you so much for being my guest on Power of 10.
Thank you for having me, Andy. I loved talking with you, and I hope we get a chance to talk again soon.
Take care.
Thank you.
As I'm sure you're aware, you've been listening to Power of 10. My name is Andy Polaine. You can find me at Polaine on Twitter or Polaine.com, where you can find more episodes and sign up for my newsletter, Doctor's Note. If you like the show, please take a moment to give it a rating on iTunes. It really helps others find us. And as always, get in touch if you have any comments, feedback or suggestions for guests. All the links are in the show notes. Thanks for listening and see you next time.